This terracotta pot definitely has seen better days, but who knows, we can make this into a beautiful decoupage pot. So what we're going to do is start out by washing this with our Dawn Power Wash, and once that is completely dried, we have a blank surface to work with. And this is what it looks like. You can kind of see that it's deteriorating on the sides there, and there's a rough spot on it. But I think this is going to be amazing for texture, and it's going to really elevate our creation. So I'm going to get a paintable surface, and I'm just going to place the pot on top. Next, I'm going to grab my Free chalk paint in the color Plaster. We're going to just give a nice coat of paint around the whole entire pot. And we're just going to go around the edges on the top, about a ½ inch down. You may have noticed that I didn't go over the rough edges on the pot with the paint yet, and this is because I wanted to use a different type of brush for that piece. I'm using a bigger brush that's rounded, and I'm going to do a really light dry brush over the top of this area. And I'm already really liking how this is turning out. And if you didn't want to decoupage it, you could probably just leave it like this, and it already gives it a really cool texture. But I wanted to decoupage this, and I found this adorable napkin at Home Goods, and I love it. It has these cute little ladybugs on it, and we're going to pull the back 2 layers off of this. And an easy trick to pull those layers off is using just a little piece of painter's tape. I've also used just regular clear tape as well, and it works great. So I'll set this napkin aside for a minute, and I grabbed an egg carton, and I'm just going to use that as a way to hold my pot in place while I'm doing my decoupage. And today I'm going to be trying out the new Mod Podge multi-surface, and this one is matte, and I'm going to just put a little bit of it in a bowl here, so it'll be a little bit easier for me to use my paintbrush to spread this on. And so when I'm spreading around this Mod Podge, I am making sure that I don't put any of it on that rough edge. I'm only doing it where I did the solid color white paint. We are not going to be sticking the napkin to that area where it's all roughed up. To make this a little bit easier on myself, I'm only doing half of the pot at one time for the decoupage. And now I just laid the napkin over the top of the pot. Don't worry about covering that rough area. We'll get that off later. Next, I grabbed a little bit of cling wrap, and we're going to use that cling wrap to help smooth everything down and into place. And I am going to fold the napkin down into the edges of the pot to give it a cool scallop look inside. As you can see, I'm just rubbing my hands across that plastic wrap just to smooth everything into place. And I'm going to put this down onto our surface here, and I had put a little bit of Mod Podge on the bottom as well, and we're just going to fold the napkin down into the bottom piece of this pot. And then I remove the piece of cling wrap. I'm going to keep it in my hand, and with one hand I'm going to use it to hold down the decoupage napkin, and with the other hand I'm going to lightly tear the remainder of the napkin off of our pot. And once I've completely removed that other part of the napkin, I did come back around with a little bit of decoupage and just put down a little decoupage any place that it might be folding up, just to make sure everything stayed into place. And now once that is dry, I put that back down on our egg carton, and we're going to repeat the same steps for the other half of our pot. And once we finished tearing any of that extra napkin off of our pot, I did go back with the Mod Podge, and I did what I did earlier and just sealed everything in. Now, once that was completely dry, I grabbed my Mod Podge multi-gloss finish, and we're going to go ahead and seal everything in on the smoothed out areas. We are not going to put any of this Mod Podge on the roughed up areas because we don't want any glue over that napkin, because it's going to make it so much easier to remove in a few minutes. Now, once everything is dry, it will look like this. And I'm going to grab a razor blade and a makeup applicator. And I just get these makeup applicators at Walmart. And using the razor blade, I'm just going to cut around the edge of the napkin on that roughed up area. And I use the makeup applicator just to assist in getting that napkin off. And I'm just going to keep repeating these steps until I've removed all of that napkin off of the roughed up area on the terracotta pot. This is turning out great. For our next step here is we're going to grab that egg carton again and set the pot back on top. And using my Mod Podge multi-surface gloss, we're going to go ahead and just paint a nice coat over the whole entire pot this time, including the roughed up areas, which will help seal in any paint and hopefully stop any more corrosion. And now that everything has dried, I want to add a few finishing touches. I found these adorable ladybugs last year at Dollar Tree, and I had a bunch left over, so I'm going to hot glue them onto our pot. They do have a self-adhesive sticker on there, but I was afraid that that wouldn't hold up very well, which is why I'm adding some extra glue. And I'm going to put 3 of these ladybugs on our pot. And I just love how this pot turns out. It is such a big transformation. There's a before and after picture. And if you're watching and enjoying this content, please consider hitting that subscribe button below. It really helps my channel grow. Thanks! This is an upcycling project. This lamp I've had in my garden for the last 2 years. It still lights up, but it's not looking great. So we're going to start out by just taking all of it apart, and we're going to give this a nice cleaning. And to do this, I am going to use some hot water with some vinegar and some baking soda. Now I'm just going to take a little bit of the vinegar and the baking soda and mix it into a paste, and then using a toothbrush, that'll allow me to really scrub the clear plastic on this little light. And now that all of our pieces are nice and clean, I'm going to go ahead and put the stake back together. And what we'll do here is I'm grabbing some of this plastic paint from Plaid in black, and I'm just going to refresh the stake using that black paint. And all I needed was 1 coat, and this looked brand new. Now while this is drying, I went ahead and I grabbed a little piece of floral foam and I just cut a little hole in it so that I could stick the lamp inside that hole. Next, I grabbed some cling wrap and I'm going to put that over the top of the green foam and then add the light back over the top of the cling wrap. Now I'm grabbing my plastic paint in the color red and I'm going to paint the plastic pieces on this lid. And we're not going to paint over the top of the solar panel, but everywhere else we're going to paint red. To cover the black with the red paint, it did take me 3 coats of paint, and I actually did a 4th coat because I really wanted to make sure that you saw no black underneath. Now, once everything is dry, I went back to my black plastic paint and I'm using a Q-tip and just putting a little bit of paint on the Q-tip. I'm going to add some little dots onto our red lid. If you haven't guessed already, we are making a little ladybug lamp, and I think this turns out really cute. I like how this is something you can do for an upcycle, but you can also do this with a brand new light if this is some sort of style that you want in your garden. Now, once the black paint has dried, I grabbed my white plastic paint and I'm just going to make 2 little eyeballs using the back side of a Q-tip. Next, I grabbed the black paint again and I'm just going to use the back side of my brush and make some little eyelashes on our little ladybug. Here is what our little lady is looking like right now. I really like how she's turning out. For our last little step, I'm going to take some hot glue and I'm going to hot glue a little piece of pipe cleaner, and I made antennas for our little ladybug. All we have to do is add her back to the top of our lampshade and put the stake back in, and we have a brand new lamp ready to go for the summer. And I love how this turns out. This is such a great upcycling project. So I was walking through the Dollar Tree the other day and I found this adorable watering can, and I thought this would be a wonderful piece to flip to put on my deck. So we're going to start out by just removing that little red piece there and removing all of the stickers from our can. Next, I'm going to take my zip sander, and I'm using the 80 grit sandpaper that comes with it. And I'm just going to sand down the plastic so it'll be easier for the paint to adhere. And don't worry if you don't have a zip sander, you can just use 80 grit sandpaper or a sanding block. And if you'd like to know about the zip sander, I do have a link for it in my description box below. I thought I was going to spray paint this little watering can, and well, the spray paint had another idea. It stopped working after I spray painted that first piece, and I could not get it to start working again. So we're going to grab our Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster, and we're going to hand paint these, which will take a little bit longer than the spray paint, but it'll be just fine. But if you had spray paint, you could totally skip this step and spray paint everything. So I completely coated this watering can with one coat of paint. I am going to be going over it now with some Waverly chalk paint in the color Elephant. And I'm just using a round brush, and I'm going to tap that on, which will give it more of a textured look. And I'm going to do this around the whole entire watering can, including inside the watering can. But inside the watering can, I'll use a smaller brush just so it'll be easier to do. Once that paint is completely dry, I grab my sugar metallic paints, and I'm using the color Meteorite. And also I'm using the color Space Gray. So I'm using both different ones. And I'm taking a sponge brush and I'm just going to dab that around the flower pot just to give it some dimension and to make it look more rustic. Since I plan on using this outside, I grabbed my Rust-Oleum clear enamel and I'm going to give this a nice coat to seal everything in. So while that is drying, I have this piece of scrapbooking paper, and I did get this from Ben Franklin, and the brand for this paper is Photoplay, and the name is Herb Garden. So I'm going to just cut out a small tag from this paper, and since I'm going to be planting some parsley, I'm cutting out the word parsley. Since I don't have a tag punch, I'm just going to freehand this and make a little circle, or what looks kind of like a circle. And then I'll use a little hole punch and punch a hole at the top. Now let's put everything together. Let's grab our pot and let's replace the little strainer on the top of the pourer. And this should snap right back into place. And to attach the tag, I'm just going to use a small piece of jute twine, and we will just tie that right to the handle with a nice bow. And wow, this beautiful little pot is ready to display. You would never know this came from the Dollar Tree. This is so cute. I can't wait to put this out on our deck with some herbs in it. And I already planted some parsley, so I'm so excited to put this out there. If you're enjoying this content, please drop a sunshine below. So here's another fun find from the Dollar Tree, and I have not seen these before until I found this one just the other day at the Dollar Tree. And this is just a blank gnome. And I just started getting into gnomes a little bit. My husband really likes them. So we'll dedicate this project to my husband. For our first step, all I'm doing here is bending the piece of metal on the back side that attaches the stake so that I can remove the stake from the gnome. Once you get the stake removed, I just bend the metal down so that I don't hurt myself. And don't worry about the back side of the gnome. It doesn't need to be perfect. We will be gluing this onto another piece, and we won't really see the back side of this. Next, we're going to place this on a paintable surface, and this is just a small piece of cardboard. And I like to keep extra cardboard in my craft room because it makes it easy when I'm trying to paint things. Might have noticed there, but I did use a small piece of painter's tape to tape the gnome down to the cardboard so that it doesn't move around much while I'm painting. So now we're going to paint this adorable gnome. And I'm starting out with Folk Art Multi-Surface Satin Black Licorice Paint. This is the only one that's a satin finish that I'm using. The rest of the paints I'm using are a combination of different apple barrel and folk art paints, and all of them have a matte sheen. And what I'll do for this video is I'm going to leave a list of all the different colors that I'm using and the brand in the description box below. So that way, if you have a question or if you really like one of the colors, you can look for the answer right there. So now that we have our gnome painted, I am going to go ahead and grab one of these beautiful napkins. And we're going to prep this so that we can use a small piece to decoupage. So to do this, we're just going to remove the back 2 layers of the napkin. And I found using a little piece of painter's tape works really well to remove those layers. Next, I grab water and a little paintbrush, and we're just going to paint around the flowers that we want to use for decoupaging. And once you've done that, very carefully, you're just going to take your fingers and tear around where the wet part of the napkin is. Next, I do a quick fit check to make sure it's going to fit on the little watering can. And once I'm satisfied with the size of the piece of napkin, I'm going to take my Mod Podge, and I'm using the matte finish Mod Podge for this. And we're just going to coat a layer of Mod Podge on top of that little watering can. Next, I'm going to lay that napkin right on top of the Mod Podge while it is still wet, and using a small piece of cling wrap, I'm going to tap the napkin down to remove any wrinkles. Once that is completely dry, I do take my Mod Podge and do a little light coat over the top to seal everything in. Since this gnome is going to be used outside, I decided to use my Rust-Oleum clear enamel, and I'm going to spray a coat over the top to seal everything in. Now I'm going to put all of the elements together. I found this pot at the Dollar Tree in the nautical section, and I thought this was a perfect size for this gnome. And what we're going to do here is I grabbed my stash of beads out, and I grabbed 4 beads that were already painted. And these beads I did get on Amazon, so I'll put a link in my description box below for those. And what we're going to do here is we'll flip the pot over, and using some hot glue, we're going to hot glue the beads at 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. And these will make perfect little legs for our pot. And before we attach the gnome, we want to make sure we flip the pot over and do a fit check to make sure we know where the gnome hits so the feet look like they're touching the ground. Next, we're going to grab our E6000 and I add a little bit of that glue to the pot itself. Now grab your hot glue and put a little bit of hot glue on the gnome. These two are now ready to become a sandwich. So put them together, and then using your pink clips, we'll go ahead and clip those into place and let that sit for about an hour. Now, time to remove those clips and put some flowers in there. And what I found helpful was using these starter pots from the Dollar Tree, and they come in a 6-pack, and they fit perfectly inside this pot. And that's what I planted my flowers in. And here is our adorable gnome, all ready to go to be placed outside on the deck. I love how this gnome turned out. I think my husband's gonna like it as well. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. This craft is going to start out with 2 2-inch pots, 2 3-inch pots, and a cork. We're gonna start by taking our cork, and I'm going to cut it at a 45-degree angle. It'll be a little over a 1/2 inch toward the top and less than 1/4 inch at the bottom. Once your cork is cut, we're going to go ahead and glue everything together. I'm starting out with some E6000 glue, and I'm going to put that around the rim of the first pot. We're basically going to be stacking the first 2 big pots together. So we're using the E6000 glue, and then I'll use a little bit of hot glue, and we'll stack the other larger pot on top of this pot. Next, we're going to grab the E6000 glue again, and I'm going to add a little bit to the top pot, and then we're going to add a tiny bit of hot glue. Next, I'm going to put one of the smaller pots right on top so that we'll be able to put a flower in it later. Next, let's go ahead and attach that cork. We're going to go ahead and add the E6000 glue to where we have the cut in the cork. And then we're going to add a little bit of hot glue there as well. Next, we're going to position that on the back side of these flower pots. And I want the larger side facing down and the shorter side facing up. And I'm just positioning this right where I have the two pots on the bottom meeting. And it's just going to sit there in glue for about an hour. And once it feels secure, I'm going to grab some Loctite. And this is what we're going to use to attach our tail. And if you haven't guessed yet, we are making a chicken flower pot. Yes, that's right, a chicken flower pot. I'm so excited about this piece. So once I get the Loctite going, I'm going to go ahead and just put that on the cork there. And I found that it was better to just lay my piece down so it'd be easier for me to attach this flower pot to the cork. And because of the angles on these flower pots, I found that it was easier for me to just prop this little pot at the top up with a little container, and then I actually leaned this up against two jars of paint just to make it a little bit simpler because I wanted to kind of keep it in position, and so you can kind of see what I did here. Next, I went back in with the Loctite, and I went and I filled in that whole area around the pot on the bottom, and it completely covered the cork. And since I didn't want to get any of that Loctite on my fingers, I did use a skewer to move the Loctite around and just completely cover everything. And once you're satisfied, pack your patience and let this sit overnight. So the next day I came in with some multi-surface satin paint from Folk Art, and this one was in the color Vintage White, and I go ahead and I do 2 nice coats over the whole entire piece. Now once that paint has completely dried, I'm going to grab my black paint pen and we're going to draw our chicken face on the top pot. And we're going to start out by just drawing an upside down triangle. Then next, we're going to put one eye on either side of that triangle. We'll start by just drawing the circles first, and then we'll come back in and we'll draw the pupil. Now we're going to draw a U shape underneath that triangle. And now for our last step, we're going to go ahead and draw 3 little scallops above the eyes on the top rim of the pot. Next, I grab my Folk Art multi-surface satin paint in color 2902, and we're going to take that with a really small paintbrush, and we're going to paint the triangle a rusty orange color. Now I do try to color it in the lines, but don't worry if you get a little bit outside the lines. We will come back in with our marker later, our paint pen, and we'll go ahead and retrace everything. Then I come in with my heat tool and I go ahead and give it a quick dry. And next we're going to grab out our flamingo red from Apple Barrel. And then we're going to take that red paint and we're going to paint the comb on the chicken and also that little U shape underneath the beak. And once that was dry, I went ahead and I did do a second coat of the red and the orange paint just to make sure it was nice and vibrant. And once everything was really dry, I did come back around with that paint pen and I just retraced everything on my chicken. And now here is what our little hen looks like. I love how this chicken turned out. And the top pot, you're able to put a flower or a plant in there. I did try to put one in on the tail, but because of the weight distribution, the chicken didn't want to stand up with that in there. But I still think this looks amazing. I can't wait to display him outside on my deck. Let me know what you think in the comments below. So let's decoupage a terracotta pot. For our first step, I'm going to take some blue painter's tape and I'm going to tape the rim of the pot off. So that way we don't get any paint on this portion of the terracotta, because I really like that terracotta color and I want it to match the saucer when we're done. And there was a little marking on the terracotta pot saying that it was made in Portugal, and I wanted to make sure I knew where that was underneath the tape. So I just took a smaller piece of painter's tape and I just made a little like arrow area so I would know where that was at. So when I was doing the decoupage, I knew which side I wanted to be the front side of the pot and which side I wanted it to be the back side. Next, I grabbed some Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I'm going to set this terracotta pot onto a turntable upside down, and I'm going to go ahead and paint the base of this terracotta pot. And I think this was actually the first time I've used the turntable to paint something, and I found it very easy to use, and I really liked it. Now, while our paint is drying, I'm going to prep our napkin. And I just love this mushroom napkin. I got it at, I believe it was Home Goods last summer. And I just, I think mushrooms are really in right now. And I like the bright colors on this. So I thought this would go great with the terracotta pot. So I'm going to start out by just unfolding it. And then I'm going to take those back 2 layers off of this napkin using a piece of painter's tape. Next, I'm going to take a little container of some water and I'm going to use a paintbrush and I'm going to paint a line down the center of the napkin. Then we're going to just tear the napkin where the water is, and this will allow us to tear it in a strategic way. And once we have that napkin torn in half, I did go back with the water and I tore a little piece off along the bottom edges of both of the napkins just to make sure the whole perimeter was actually torn off. So it looked like a rectangle that was torn in a strategic way. Next, let's grab some Mod Podge. I'm going to be using the outdoor Mod Podge for this project. Next, I grabbed an egg carton, and this is a great way to hold your project as an extra set of hands. So I'm just going to lay my terracotta pot on top. Now I'm going to apply the Mod Podge, and I'm just applying the Mod Podge to the painted sections on this pot, and we're only going to do one side at a time. Now, while the Mod Podge is still wet, I'm going to lay the napkin right over the top of the painted surface. And we're just going to set that down lightly, and I'm not going to do much tapping yet. I'm going to grab a piece of cling wrap or saran wrap, and I'm going to place that over the top of the napkin, and then we'll go ahead and smooth everything into place. And now there is going to be a little bit of an overhang with some of that napkin. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be using both hands there. And I just lightly tear off the excess napkin from our terracotta pot. Now, after that is dry, we're going to repeat the same step on the opposite side of the pot. We'll take our Mod Podge and we'll go ahead and paint that over the top of the painted area on the pot. And then we'll go ahead and take that napkin and smooth that right on top. Now there will be also a little bit of overhang on this, but that is okay because we're going to go ahead and just remove that the same way. And there'll be a small seam, but you'll hardly see it because of the way that we've torn the paper. So once you have your excess paper removed, I come back with my Mod Podge on the brush and I just go ahead and I paint down any of those extra pieces. And if there are any spots on the pot that didn't get covered by the napkin, you can take any of those scrap pieces of napkin and I just tear them to match up the best that I can, and I put them straight onto the pot and then cover them with a little bit of Mod Podge. Now, once the Mod Podge has completely dried, I went ahead and I put the flower pot back onto that turntable, and I'm going to grab the Mod Podge again, and we're going to just paint a sealing coat over the top of everything. Now, once our Mod Podge seal is completely dry, I come back in with my zip sander, but a sanding block would be just fine. And I'm just going to remove any excess paper along the rim of the pot. And I'm going to do this before I pull off the painter's tape, just in case it's kind of stuck on there with any of the Mod Podge glue. And it will just make it a lot cleaner when we pull that tape off to give it that nice line. Now we get to remove that painter's tape. And that's all there is to it. Once that painter's tape is removed, we have a beautiful decoupage pot. And the rim will match your little coaster perfectly, so it has a nice two-toned look. And if you're enjoying this content, I invite you to hit that subscribe button below. Thank you! I am so excited about this piece. I have recently started growing lavender in my garden, and I really wanted some signage for that. And this is going to be a beautiful decorative piece for that area. So to start out, I'm going to place my wood plaque onto a paintable surface. And I'm going to be using the color Almond Latte, and it's a flat paint from Folk Art. And I'm going to paint both sides of this plaque. Now, once everything has completely dried, I grabbed out my rubber stamps, and I've had these stamps for a very long time. They are from Stampin' Up, and I think they're from like 2002. So I am going to take my terracotta black paint here, and I'm going to just put that down onto a piece of cardboard, and I'm just spreading it out to make it easier for me to use the stamps in the paint. Now I'm going to be stamping the paint onto this plaque, and then once I'm done with each letter, I do wash them off right away so that the paint doesn't stick to the rubber. And this is just a fun, unique way to use your stamps that may not get used very often, and it gives a totally different look to your piece. And I'm going to be spelling out the word Lavender Lane for my little plaque. And now that we have our letters complete, let's go ahead and decorate our sign. I am using some green acrylic paint, and this is a satin finish, and I'm just going to be drawing some green lines on the bottom of my piece here. And these are going to be the stems to my lavender. Next, I'm going to take a little bit of that green paint, and I'm going to put that down onto my little palette here, and I'm going to add a tiny bit of white paint to that. We're just going to lighten that up and do the same thing over again and add a few more strands for our lavender. What I like about just lightening up the first green, it gives a really good contrast to the darker green and the lighter green, but they're still in the same kind of like color wheel because we're using the same paint. Next, I grabbed some flat paint, and this one is Grapevine, and we're going to be using this for our lavender. And to paint the lavender, we're going to be using Q-tips. As you can see, I kind of start at the top where I put just a few little dots of that lavender paint, and then it gets a little bit bigger, and then we go a little bit narrower. Just kind of like how you would imagine a lavender plant to look like. And then we're just going to keep repeating the same step until we have filled all of our stems up with some beautiful lavender. Now, to give some dimension to our lavender, I'm going to be taking some of the satin parchment paint, and I'm going to be adding that to my palette with a little bit of the purple paint that we were using earlier. And I'm just going to mix that together so we have a nice light lavender look. Then using that Q-tip, we're going to add some highlights to all of our lavender strands. Now grabbing that parchment colored paint again, we're going to add that to our palette with a tiny sliver of purple paint, and we're going to mix that together. And this will be our final little highlight to our lavender strands. And we're going to use our Q-tip again, but we're just going to do a really light dry brush in a way with the Q-tip over the top of these lavender pieces. So I just kind of dab that Q-tip onto that cardboard first just to get some of that paint off of there. So it's very faint, that what I'm putting onto my little lavender plants. And this just gives it a really nice light glow. And for some final touches on our lavender plant, I am taking a very fine tipped brush and I'm taking the dark purple paint and I'm just going to add a little bit of a speckle to all of my pieces of lavender. Next, I'm going to take the original green paint we used earlier, and I'm just going to add that to a dry round brush, and I'm just going to add a little bit of grass along the bottom of our piece. And now to frame out our piece, I did grab that terracotta black that I was using earlier, and I'm going to take a round brush again with the dry brush technique, and just do that around the whole entire perimeter of our plaque, just to give it that extra frame that it needed. And now I'm going to flip this sign over and I'm going to do the same thing on the back side. But this time I'm not going to be putting the Lavender Lane. I'm going to be making longer strands of lavender because this sign is going to be hanging in my lavender garden and you're going to see it from both sides. So I wanted both sides to have a beautiful picture. So once we have the first layer of purple, I went back with my lighter purple, and then we're going to add our white highlights. Next, we're going to go ahead and just sprinkle a little bit of that darker purple right over the top, just to give it some little specks. Now we're going to add our grass, and once we have our grass, we'll add our border. And once everything has dried, we're going to go ahead and add our hanger back to our plaque. Now I'm going to take my sign outside with my Rust-Oleum matte clear enamel, and I'm just going to hang it on a hanger so I can spray both sides at the same time and let it dry. Once I've done 3 good coats of this sealer on here, I'm going to take this back inside and we're going to add a few additional items to our piece. So I had a few pieces of leftover lavender floral, and I'm going to go ahead and just trim up this floral using my wire cutters. And I'm taking these pieces and I'm going to make a little swag for the front of my sign. And to attach these pieces, I'm going to be using my floral tape, and you can find this at the Dollar Tree or at Hobby Lobby. And you're just going to wrap that around your piece in the center. Now, once you have your swag made, I did take a little bit of twine and I am going to wrap this around the center of my floral piece. And to make sure that this sticks, I am going to add a little bit of my Type Bond quick and thick glue to make sure that this twine stays in place. Now, once we have our swag in place, I'm going to be using my Super Glue Fix All adhesive that I get at the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to attach that to my sign. And then I am going to attach a little twine bow to the top just to finish everything off. Now, here is what our sign looks like on both sides. I just love how this turns out. This is such a fun piece and I cannot wait to hang this in my garden. Let me know what you think about this piece in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this content, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps my channel grow. Thanks! I found this great piece of wood at the thrift store the other day. And looking on the back of it, it is a 14-inch piece of wood, and they said it was for a clock. Well, we're going to do something different with it. It's a really nice, heavy piece of wood, and I like that there's already a hole drilled in it. So after removing the stickers, I took some flat black paint that I had, and I just spray painted both sides. To seal everything in, I'm using Rust-Oleum Clear Semi-Gloss, and I'm going to do this on both sides of the piece of wood. So I've had these decorative knobs in my stash for quite a while, and they were from the Dollar Tree. And what we're going to do is we're going to add that to the top of this little piece of wood. So with the hole already drilled in there, we're just going to screw this little knob into the wood. And now that this piece of wood is all put together, we're going to take this outside. I went to Walmart looking for a pot that would work with this piece of wood, and I found this one, and it worked out perfectly. It's really tall, and the piece of wood fits on top of it so nicely. And this will make a perfect little side table where you can have your drinks, or if you open up this little pot, you can stick blankets in here for storage, or ice, and then have all of your beverages nice and cold while you're sitting by the fire. Now here's 2 fun ways that you can add air-dried clay to your terracotta pots. The first way is doing something with the letters. So I'm going to be using this letter set that I got on Amazon, and it actually came with letters, hearts, and flowers. And the air-dried clay that I'm using is Stampere's soft white clay. Now this package I've had for some time. I used it at the Christmas season. But I've been keeping it in a Ziploc bag, and it stayed pretty fresh. It's not as fresh as it was when I first opened the package, but it worked great still for this project. And I'm going to start by putting some of this clay, and I'm just pushing it into the mold, and I'm spelling out the word parsley. And I started going a little overboard. I spelled out the word parsley, and then I tried it in all capitals, and I actually liked the all capitals better, and then I did the word time. After that, I decided to try out the rose mold that came with the same set. And I'm just doing the same thing, and I'm pressing the clay in, and then once the clay has been pushed in, I go ahead and I remove the little roses from the set. Now, before the clay sets up, we are going to attach these to our clay pots. So I'm going to start out with the first clay pot, and I'm going to just flip over some of those roses that we created earlier, and I'm adding my quick and thick Tite Bond glue to the back side of these roses. Next, we're just going to go ahead and arrange these on the outside of our flower pot, any way you'd like. And once you're satisfied with the placement of all your flowers, we're just going to go ahead and set this aside to dry overnight. Now let's make an herb pot. I'm going to use that same Tite Bond quick and thick glue, but this time I'm going to apply it directly to the clay pot along the rim. And I'll use a paintbrush to just smooth out that glue. Once I'm satisfied with where I want to place the letters, I'll go ahead and add the word parsley. And then we just let that dry overnight. Now don't worry about the glue that was on the pot. It dries clear and is paintable, and I didn't really see much of a texture difference once everything was dry. And the next day, I grabbed my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster, and we're going to go ahead and just paint the whole entire pot. And I do paint over the top of the letters. And while that is drying, I went ahead and painted the other pot as well with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. And now here is what they look like with their first coat of plaster colored paint. Now once I have that done, I am going to take the one with the flowers on it. I'm going to start with that one first. And using an egg carton to just help steady my hand, I'm going to grab a distressing brush and some rose-colored paint. And this is, I think, Vintage Tea Rose from Folk Art in matte. And I'm going to just go ahead and just brush that lightly over the top of the roses. And once I've completed that, I thought that it needed a little bit more. So I ended up distressing the whole entire piece. And then after that, I thought that, wow, that is a lot more pink than I wanted. So I went back in with the plaster color paint and lightened everything up. Now let's go back to our herb pot for parsley. And I'm going to use the Waverly chalk paint in the color ink and a distressing brush. Now we're going to start by just distressing the word parsley. And then I decided to come in with a finer tip brush, and I actually went through and just painted the word parsley with the ink color. And if you like the bold look, this could be finished right here. But I wanted more of a vintage look, and so I decided to go back over everything with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. And then once everything was dry, I grabbed my zip sander, but a sandy block would work well too, and I just went back and sanded over the top of the letters very lightly. Now time to seal our pots. I did this off camera, but I'm using my Rust-Oleum matte clear enamel, and I just sprayed down both of these pots. And I just love how these pots turned out. These are totally my style. However, if this is not your style, don't worry. Paint comes in all sorts of colors. Paint them whatever color fits your style best. So here's a quick and easy craft, so if you blink, you might miss it. This craft is so fun. You can just take any stickers that you have that you like, and I'm going to go ahead and add the Titebond glue. So these are some jeweled stickers that I found at the Dollar Tree. And I'm going to take that Titebond glue and I'm just going to paint it around the whole entire rim of my pot. Then I'm just going to add my sticker around the perimeter of the pot, right on top of the glue. And this sticker almost fit perfectly. I had only one extra bead here, so I just am going to cut that off with my scissors. Now here's what our pot looks like with the sparkly stickers. Now that is not my style typically, so what I am going to do is I'm going to use my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I'm going to just paint over the whole entire pot and the stickers. And then once everything is dry, I'm going to take this little pot outside and I'm going to seal it with my Rust-Oleum clear enamel. And now this pot is complete. I just love how this turns out. It's so easy and so much fun. While working in the yard, I found 2 pots that were sun damaged and really, really dirty. So I took them over to the sink, and using my Dawn Power Spray, I'm going to just go ahead and wash these really well. Then I take these back out once they were completely dry, and I grab my Rust-Oleum paint, and this is a Satin Colonial Red Ultra Cover Spray Paint. And I think I got this at Lowe's, but you can get this at most hardware stores or on Amazon. And once we get these completely covered, I just set them aside to dry, and I'm going to go inside and start working on my napkins. So I found these beautiful butterfly napkins at Home Goods, and they're a Martha Stewart brand napkin. And I'm going to go ahead and just remove the bottom 2 layers. And this second layer on the napkin was definitely giving me trouble, and it did take me quite a bit of effort to get that off of this napkin, but it is well worth it. So don't worry if you tear it a little bit on the sides, because we're going to be cutting out just the butterflies. Now, once you get those layers removed, you need to do that again for 2 more napkins, so you have 3 napkins ready to go. And then all we're going to do is cut out all of those little butterflies, and I used 12 butterflies for this project. Next, I grabbed my outdoor Mod Podge since we're going to be keeping these pots outside. And this pot liked to roll around quite a bit on my table, so what I found was using 2 little bottles of Waverly paint, I was able to brace that pot to keep it from rolling around on me. Next, I grabbed my Mod Podge and I'm just going to paint a nice coat in the center of this pot. And then very carefully, I'm going to lay one of the butterflies over the top of the Mod Podge. And using some cling wrap, I go ahead and just pat that down until all the wrinkles are out. Now, once this is dry, we're going to rotate the planter and repeat this step 5 more times. So we'll be a total of 6 butterflies on this planter. And between butterflies, I was just rotating back and forth between the 2 different planters so we could get both of them looking beautiful. And now that we have all these butterflies on our planters, we're going to set these aside to dry for a little bit. Now, since these planters are going to be outside, I'm going to seal them with my matte clear enamel by Rust-Oleum. And once everything has dried, we can fill these up with some beautiful flowers. And here is what our pots look like. I am so happy with how these turned out. I can't wait to display them in my yard this summer. So this chicken has seen better days. I bought it about 10 years ago and it's been in a few different flower pots and I've moved it around the yard, and then it got forgotten about and buried in some moss. So I decided to bring it in and wash it with some Dawn Power Wash and scrub off whatever paint that I could. And this is what I was left with. So since this was made with a hard plastic, I'm going to use my Paint for Plastic by Folk Art. And the first paint I used here was the Earl Grey, and then I'm going to add a tiny bit of this black olive paint, and I'm mixing it together in a bowl just to make a darker gray. When you're looking at this chicken, it is sitting inside of a noodle can, and so that bottom piece there is the lid of the tin can. So I'm going to paint that first, since that's on the bottom part of this little statue, and that way once we get that bottom piece completely done and dry, we can flip that over and do the remainder part of the chicken. And to get the coat that I really wanted on this chicken, I did have to do 2 coats of paint. So you notice there that I used my heat tool just to dry the paint, and that worked just fine for this plastic paint. Now, once all of the gray paint was done and dry, I went ahead and I grabbed the Folk Art plastic paint in Cherry Cola. And that is what I'm going to paint the can. I'm going to start out by doing 2 coats of paint on the bottom part of this can. Now that the bottom half of our little statue is complete and we can set this down, we are going to grab some coffee creamer paint and we're going to use that for our chicken. And while we still have that red paint out, we'll finish some of the details on the chicken's face. Now it's time to paint the beak. I'm going to use Paint for Plastic Folk Art in the color Iced Tea, and this turns out so nice. It's perfect color for a beak on a chicken. And for her eyes, we're just going to use our black plastic paint. And while we have the black paint out, I'm going to use that to paint the word noodles. And you can kind of see an indentation that was on there previously But I don't remember the last time I saw anything written on this chicken. And there's a small circle that is going around the word noodles just to make it look kind of like a label. And I just reused the coffee creamer paint for this. And for our last paint color, we're going to just reuse that gray that we made up and go around the outside of the can, giving it all the details to make it look like a tin can. So once we are done painting our chicken, I did let it sit overnight to make sure it was completely dry before I sealed it. And to seal this, I'm using Rust-Oleum Matte Clear Enamel, and I did 2 coats of this. And here is how it transformed. I want to do a before and after photo of this because this turned out so cute. And now to go put her back in the garden, I am so excited. Thrifting in your yard can be so much fun and so rewarding. So I found some old pots in the yard that needed some love and care, but I figured we could use these again for the upcoming season. So I started out by just removing all of the excess dirt and giving them a nice wash. Once they were clean, I started with the black pot here, and I'm going to spray paint this all over the outside and then just on the inner rim because we don't need to worry about where the dirt's gonna be. Now I was going to use my older pot for this, but it had holes drilled in it, and to buy Flex Seal it was $18 and it was $6 to buy this pot instead. So I did invest in a second pot here because I needed one that the holes were not drilled out in. Now I took this pot inside and we are going to use our chorizo sealer on the outer rim, and I am going to use the chorizo flakes on the outer rim, and we're going to make it a mosaic look along the top part of this rim. And if you get any of this sealer on the pot, you can just wipe it clean with a baby wipe. It's really easy to wipe off. And the terrazzo flake color that I'm using is the brown multi. Once I've done one section, I'm going to continue doing this until I make it all the way around the pot. And to keep the pot from rolling around, I did put this down into a plastic lid. This is a disposable lid I have in my craft room that I use for different crafts and things. But it worked out really good. It was for like a 9x9 pan, and I believe I got it at the Dollar Tree. Now, once I had the perimeter done, I did go ahead and do the inside lip of the pot as well. And it was the same technique, just using the sealer and then adding the flakes. Now, once everything had dried, I did take that terrazzo sealer and you do a second coat to seal all of it in. So you use it as a base and as a sealer. It's the same item, similar to Mod Podge. And once this is completely dry, I do take it outside and I seal it with my clear matte enamel. Let's put this together. Using that first black pot, I put a bunch of dirt in there, and then I'm going to put the little pot on top in the center. Now in the ring where the dirt is still at, that's where I'm going to add a few extra plants and some additional potting soil. Now I'm going to fill that top pot up with a bunch of water. Probably back in January, I bought a solar fountain from Amazon on their specials or something. It was like $9.99. And I just stuck that inside the pot there, and it worked amazing. Now, the one thing that is a downside to it is it doesn't have a battery, so it only works when there's actually sun on it. But this is what it turned out like. I think it turned out so cute and is a great addition to the garden. Hiding inside this rosemary bush is a farmhouse sign. So we're going to have to dig in here a little bit to dig this one out. It's been in there for quite some time, and it definitely needs a makeover. Now, I want to say that this is some sort of slate or some sort of rockery. Very thin. It's not wood. It's definitely something else, and it's not plastic. But we are going to wash this really well, and then I brought this back into my craft room. So I'm looking this over, I'm trying to decide what to do with this. And I grabbed out my Terracotta black paint. And this is an indoor-outdoor paint. I figured this would go well with whatever surface this is. For the video purposes, I am going to be doing this sideways, and then I will flip it over and show you what it's going to look like when we're done. So we're going to start out by just completely covering this with our black terracotta paint. Now, I probably could have gotten away with one coat, but I did do 2 coats because it was going outside and I wanted to make sure it withstood the test of time, or at least one summer season. So once you've let this dry for at least a few hours, I went ahead and I cut out a farm sign stencil using my Cricut Joy. And I want to say a quick thank you to Unicorn Dust and Designs. I had no idea that they had vinyl that was for stencils specifically. I always just use my normal vinyl. So thank you for talking about it in your video, and I was able to find some. And I will put a link in my description box below of the vinyl that I am using. This stencil I did find on Cricut Design Space. It was one of their pre-made templates. All I needed to do was size it to fit my sign. I did put my straight edge on here just to try to maybe help me eyeball it better, kind of center it the best that I can onto this sign. I think I did a good job. It isn't perfect, but I like how it turns out. So we're going to go ahead and just lay this out, and then once all of that is down, I did use my Cricut tool there to just push everything down. Then remove the transfer tape, and so all that's left on the board is the stencil. Did cut the stencil a little close at the bottom there, so I am just putting a piece of painter's tape down so I don't get any excess paint onto the sign. And I'm using my flat paint here, and this is a white flat paint. And I'll put a link for it in my description box below if I can find it for you guys. But I'm just going to pour that into a bowl, and using a sponge, I'm just going to sponge over the stencil. So now here is what I thought would be the fun part, pulling the stencil off. But this thing was stuck on there really good. I did get my tools out that Cricut has, and I start really poking at it to pull all of this off. So now that I have everything taken off, I see I have some paint bleeding in spots. So yeah, now I get to come back around and fix that. So I just grabbed my terracotta paint, and I'm just going to go ahead and fix all of the spots that don't look great. So that's what we're doing next. Also went in with that flat white paint and fixed the W. So now that I'm satisfied with how this looks, I'm going to take this back outside now that it's dry and use my Rust-Oleum clear enamel, and I'm going to just give a nice top coat to this so that it seals everything in. And since this did not have a hanger anymore, I am going to replace it with a thick jute, and I'm going to do the knots on the front and then loop that around so we have a way to hang this beautiful sign. And once I trim any excess jute off, we are ready to go display this sign in the yard. I think this turned out amazing. It was such a fun thrift flip to make. I recommend this to anybody out there. This is a great beginner-friendly craft. And if you're enjoying this content, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Thank you. I just love crafting with solar lights, and I want to try a new one here with these 5 little solar lights from the Dollar Tree. So to turn these solar lights on, you do have to remove the little lid on the top there, and there's an on-off switch. And you just go ahead and make sure you turn all of these on and make sure each one of these work before we start our craft. Next, I grabbed some twine, and this twine I did get at Walmart. This is the thicker twine that you can get in a larger roll. It's typically over by the floral section. And what I'm doing here is I'm taking some painter's tape, and I'm just going to go ahead and measure out 18-inch strips, but I'm going to keep them all attached. So we're going to make a big long string, and every 18 inches, I'm going to add a little piece of blue painter's tape just to make sure I know where I want to put each one of these lights so they are spaced evenly. And for the ends of my twine, I did do a 24-inch length. That gave me some extra twine to be able to tie this wherever I would like. Now, to make this a little bit easier to maneuver, I am going to remove the lids from all of these little lights because we're going to take those and tie them to our twine. And then the next step is so simple. I'm just going to go ahead and take that twine and tie each one of these pieces to where the blue tape is. So I found that it was easier to remove the blue tape right before I tied my knot, and then I just tied the knot right there. And this is just going to keep everything in place so it'll lay perfectly when we hang this outside. Now, I did find that it was easier to start with the center light first, and then I did the other lights on either side of it after that. And then we're just going to repeat this step till all 5 lights are attached to our twine. Next, we're just going to add the base back to all of our solar lights. And now that our light set is ready to go, I'm going to go hang this outside along my fence line. And I just love how this turns out. It's such a great piece to add to your garden to decorate it. And what I love about these solar lights is they're just a little bit different than some of the other ones. They kind of look like they're floating candles. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, craft more, stress less.